Hi, my name is Abrah Arneson, and I'm a clinical herbal therapist and practice in Ottawa, Ontario, and the beautiful Gatineau Hills in my home, which is where I am right now. And there's beautiful snow coming down, these big fluffy flakes, my favorite kind of snow. And I have been in practice with herbal medicine for about 20 years now. And I have come to the conclusion that herbal medicine works best when it's thought of in relationship to the body, not as something that is done to the body. So, how um, herbal medicine supports the body coming into balance through its relationship with the body. And you want to think about this as thousands and thousands of years old, and that our bodies evolved alongside plants. And plants were actually around for about 7 million years before animal bodies showed up. So this has been a long evolution where they've grown up together on this beautiful planet. And sometimes I think thinking about them this way is more helpful to the herbalist than getting kind of tangled up in a more reductionist model of herbal medicine where it's like this herb does this. So I want to talk today about the mucous membrane because it's a really important part of the body. It has all sorts of different functions. It does all sorts of different things for us. It's kind of gross, and plants do so much to support the health of the mucous membrane. And we don't really find that in any other form of medicine. So this is a unique capacity herbalists have to heal the mucosa of the body. So let's start with my little PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so slideshow, play from start. Okay, we're ready to go. So, herbalists anatomy and physiology. So, this is specific for herbalists. And this is the mucosa. And my name is Abrah Arneson. And this is a stained slide of a mucosa. The mucosa is not hot pink. And this is the mucosa right along the top here. So, let's go. So, what is it? Well, it's a slippery, sticky fluid substance that covers the interior lumens of the body. So that's all the tubes. Nature loves tubes. Trees are tubes. A lot of plants are tubes. Roots are tubes. Coral, there's a lot of tubes in coral. Bones often are tubes. The body, nature likes to use this structure called tubes, which we call tubes. And but the and they our tubes in our body, many of them are open to the outside world. And they help things be either carried into our body or carried out of our body. And they're really important, these lumens, these tubes in our body, and they're vulnerable. And the mucosa covers these tubes to protect them from stuff passing in to our body, into the interior of our body, as well as to limit things that are absorbed into the body or provide support for absorption of things into the body. The mucosa is a home for the microbiome. It also feeds all those little microbes that live with us and help us in so many ways. The mucosa is a slippery substance to help things pass through, such as your esophagus has a mucosa that allows the food to travel softly. It protects the underlying tissues, the tissues that lie underneath the mucosa, and that's generally referred to as epithelial tissues. Protects them from abrasion, like if you fall off your bike and you get you rub your knee against some gravel and it hurts. The mucosa protects the interior of your body from interacting with rough surfaces that can hurt it. So, not to mention what goes on in the stomach, but we will talk about the stomach. So these are all things. Oh, sorry, error. active participant in the immune system, and not the nervous system. Although, if you think about it providing a home for the microbiome, a big part of the microbiome in our body, then you could definitely say it's a participant in the nervous system, as our microbiomes, many bacteria are involved in um, formation of uh, um, like serotonin neurotransmitters. That's the word I'm looking for. So this is a pretty interesting place. It's kind of like a covering of skin, covers the skin on the interior of the body. And it's a really important thing to keep healthy and well. And plants have great capacity to do that. So, on a very basic level, I think of the mucosa as a play between water and fire. Remember how earlier we described the mucosa as sticky? Sticky is a property of water. If you put two drops of water together, they kind of go boom, sticking together. They also, if we talk about our emotions as a part of the water element, it's definitely our emotions that are sticky, that stick us to others. I love you, oh, I hate you, right? Creates the relationship, the glue in an emotion in relationships, at least early on. And yeah, and the fight. So the water element is basically what the mucosa is made of. It's sticky and slippery like water. However, the fire element kind of controls the water element in the body. Uh, a lot of fire will dry up the water element in the body, and a lot of fire will dry up the mucosa, the water in the mucosa. Or if there's not enough fire, cold, when we talk about the fire element, we can also be talking about cold. There's maybe too much mucosa in the body. Maybe there's too much sticky, gooey stuff covering the lumens, interfering with absorption of nutrients, causing shortness of breath, all sorts of things. Okay, so let's look at this. So if there is no mucosa, the tissues become dry and hot like sand on a July day at the beach, and porous. Things just flow into the body, and this is not good. So too much fire will dry up the mucosa, leaving the underlying tissues exposed. And this is just a really basic application of herbal medicine. But because it's so basic, if it's missed, your medicine's not going to work as well. So this is really important. Are the mucosas dry? And if they're dry, that needs to be tended to, because that's affecting long-term chronic health conditions. So here's an example. So here's a cartoon image of the mucosa. So this is the respiratory tract. So these little hair-like structures are called cilia. And in the respiratory tract, the mucosa, or the mucous membrane, sits on top of the cilia. And what the cilia does is it keeps moving this mucus along. A lot of it gets moved up and we swallow it into our stomach, and it's basically, we eliminate it. Other times, if there's a lot of mucus, we'll develop a cough, it will come out our nose, we'll sneeze. That's when the body's actively eliminating something. Okay. This image here is a goblet cell. And goblet cells, you can just think of, they create gob, which is mucus. So these are the makers of the mucosa, and they're intertwined with the epithelial cells. These are the epithelial cells. These would be the cells lining the lumen of the respiratory tract. So this would be the bronchi, the bronchioli. So a smoker is bringing in heat all the time into their body, right? Smoke, it's hot. Fire, it carries heat into the body. And one of the problems smokers have is it dries up the mucosa. And that's a big problem, because that means that these underlying tissues have lost this protective layer that carries things out that should not be there. or stuff gets stuck in it and sent out the body. Okay, so that's an example of how the fire element will dry up the mucosa. And for smokers, this would go right into the stomach, the mucosa in the stomach, the mucosa lining your esophagus, your small intestine, even your colon, right? Because you got to think these tubes are all connected up in the throat, and we're breathing the smoke in, boom. It's very drying, lots of fire. So if you're smoking, there's great herbs for protecting this mucosa. And I get it. Smoking is a very challenging addiction. And these herbs are called demulcent herbs. When we use them topically, they're called vulnerary herbs. When we take them internally, they're called demulcent herbs. And if you go out into the garden, and we're looking at marshmallow right here, marshmallow is a super easy plant to grow. I've grown it on the prairies. I now live in eastern woodland forest, and it grows really beautifully here. I can't actually imagine where it doesn't grow. It doesn't seem to really need a lot of water, although it does like water. Really easy plant to grow. If you go into the garden on June day, July day, August day, pick one of these a leaf off a marshmallow. First of all, it's very soft. And soft is one of the properties of demulcent herbs, is they soften the hardness in the body. And you taste it. And it doesn't really taste it. Usually demulcent herbs are fairly bland tasting. Tasting it, and all of a sudden you're going to have like this gooey, sticky, thick substance in your mouth. And that is the property of the demulcent herbs, and that's called mucilage. And it mimics the 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 mucous membrane in your body. It brings moisture into the mucous membrane. So this smoker needs lots of demulcent herbs like marshmallow. So let's just go back to marshmallow for a moment. In terms of demulcent herbs, I always think of marshmallow as kind of like the universal demulcent herb for the body. If in doubt, use marshmallow. All parts of the plant can be used: the flowers, the leaf, and the root. The root is the most demulcent part of the plant. Sometimes I'll just throw some leaves in a tea if I just want a little bit more moisture in that tea. And if I'm like making a flower tea, it's really nice to put some marshmallow flowers in that, because sometimes the flowers can be very drying. So you counter the dryness of the tea with some marshmallow flowers. The thing about demulcent herbs is the medicine, the phytoconstituent that creates that action is called a polysaccharide. And polysaccharides are absorbed by water. Water is its solvent. So often I use these in teas. And another kind of odd principle of demulcent herbs is often the polysaccharides are extracted better with cool water. So often you'll hear people talk about a cold infusion of marshmallow root, where you put some root in a cup of water, cover it, put it in the fridge, and in the morning you have this really thick, gooey substance that people are then supposed to drink. However, as a herbalist, I have had terrible compliance with getting people to take a cold infusion of marshmallow root just because of the texture. It is slimy. Yeah, it's just really slimy and thick and gooey and not so pleasant first thing in the morning. So I have found this plant to be extremely effective just in, you know, overnight on the counter infused teas, and it's not as thick and gooey, but I definitely get good compliance, and the results of the plant are excellent. And usually within days, people feel better breathing, or their stomach feels better, or their bowels feel better. So this is a really nice plant to have in your apothecary. You can use it in lots of different ways. Easy to grow in your garden, will self-seed all over the place. You can just dig up the roots, chop them up. You've got your marshmallow for the year. Corn silk is another great demulcent, another really super fun plant to grow in the garden. And Corn silk is a demulcent that's specific to the urinary tract. I have found corn silk so useful in so many ways. If there's chronic bladder infections, periods of time where there is no bladder infection and then the bladder infection kind of shows up, you can use teas with some ZMAs or corn silk in it to ward off that bladder infection, because what you're doing is you're using this demulcent herb to build uh, the mucous membrane in the urinary tract. Uh, I I've worked a lot with urinary tract infections over the years, and often what people do is they take antibiotics, and then a couple of months later, the year, or a couple of weeks later, or a couple of days later, the urinary tract is back. The urinary tract infection is back, and kind of goes on and on and on. And so you want to think that sometimes maybe the underlying tissues of the bladder are the tissues that lay under the mucosa. For some reason, the mucosa has been disturbed, and that's what's causing that again and again and again. There's no mucosa for the bacteria to live in. So you use these plants to go in, create a new mucosa, heal underlying tissues, and provide a home for the bacteria that lives throughout our body. Yeah, corn silk, I've one of the places sometimes too, people will feel like they have a urinary tract infection, but they don't. And I've used corn silk very successfully in that situation where, the discomfort disappears. And also in late term pregnancy, when, the baby's sitting right on top of the bladder and it's irritating. I've used a corn silk very successfully there too to resolve that irritation. So corn silk is a really great plant to have, and it's just the silk from the corn. So one of the ways you can know if there's dryness is cracks on the tongue. And so here, this person here has a number of cracks. This is also someone who has some heat in their body. So you can see the heat along here. You can see the heat inside the cracks. And you can see there's a little bit of a coat here. It's kind of yellow. Yeah, it's always hard working with photographs of the tongue, but you can see how the heat's coming through. So this person has a dryness that's being produced by heat. So demulcent plants are cooling and moistening. So a nice demulcent for this person would be perfect. Okay, sometimes the mucosa, the mucous membrane gets really wet, and then it's kind of like mud, or sometimes we say boggy. It's like thick and gooey and stuck, and then you need to dry it out. And often this will accompany coldness. There's not enough heat to break up the mucosa, or it could be infection, parasites, and the mucosa is working really hard at trying to um, protect the underlying tissues from the bug or the parasite or the microbe, whatever language we want to use to describe that. And so it gets built up and there's too much, right? So when we were looking at the image of the smoker, this would be the cilia, and this is what the mucosa sits on top of this. So if the mucosa is too heavy and thick, it presses down on the cilia in the respiratory tract, and then it can't move the mucus out, and the mucus starts building up. It goes deeper and deeper and deeper, bronchitis, chronic bronchitis, pneumonia. You want it, so the mucosa has to be fine enough and thin enough that these very fine hairs can move it up and out of the body, not too heavy so that it weighs it down. So astringent herbs are really great for helping to dry up a mucosa. And in some ways, when I say dry up a mucosa, it's kind of a misnomer. because that's not really what happens. So, what I challenge you to do is to find some raspberry leaf. And it can be a dried raspberry leaf from a tea that you might have on hand, or you can go out into the garden and pick yourself some raspberries. Raspberries are very nice to grow, very fun to go out and pick raspberries and nibble on them in July. If I get to them before my dog loves to pick raspberries. Anyways, you get this raspberry leaf, the leaf we're talking about, you put it in your mouth and you chew it, and you'll have all of a sudden like your mouth is dry. And then after a moment or two, all of a sudden you'll have this fresh liquid just come into your mouth, and it's nice and fresh. Like you can swallow the leaf, it's not going to hurt you, or you can spit it out, herbalist spit, and your mouth will feel very fresh and clean. And I often think that's actually more the action that the astringent herb is doing on the mucosa. Is it's kind of like drying up old, gucky, thick, gooey mucosa, binding it, making it easier to eliminate, while also encouraging the release of fresh mucosa from the goblet cells, that is clean and lighter than the heavy stuff. You can also, if the mucosa is really heavy and thick, you can use demulcent herbs, and that will help thin out the mucus. But a nice astringent is a good plant to have. And astringents are their phytoconstituents are tannins, and tannins are water soluble. So again, these would be teas. Oh yeah, one of my favorite astringents is meadowsweet. Meadowsweet, easy plant to grow in the garden. I have moved my meadowsweet plants, I think like 4 or 5 times. And every time I move them, they seem to recover even better than they were before. Now they have their home and they're set, and they're right next to the beehive, so that we get all that nice meadowsweet flowers are the most beautiful smelling flowers. All that nice meadowsweet nectar in the honey. But that's besides the point. So the leaves of meadowsweet are beautiful astringent plants, and very specific to the stomach. So if there's a disturbance in the mucosa in the stomach, so if someone tells you there's a lot of burning, or even if they just feel really bloated and their stomach isn't emptying, it could be partially too much mucus membrane on the stomach. Um, you can use plants like meadowsweet to dry up that mucosa a little bit. You can also use this plant very effectively in urinary tract infections. Meadowsweet, definitely a plant to discover and learn. Complex plant, high in salicin, which is once it interacts with the blood, becomes salicylate, salicylate. So it does have some pain properties. Lovely tasting tea. So when you're looking at dampness, and you're going to be seeing swelling in the tongue, you might be seeing a white coat on the tongue. This tongue is nice and round. That's generally a swollen tongue. Often on a swollen tongue, you're going to see teeth marks all along here. This person may be a little bit here, but the white coat is really specific. I often think the coating on the tongue is a reflection of what's going on in the mucosa, and a white coat. And I often like if you look at a newborn's tongue or a small child's tongue, a small child that's very healthy, you'll see this lovely thin white coat on the tongue, and that's a healthy coat. When you're looking at a tongue that has a thick white coat, that's a problem. So that's where you might decide to use some astringent herbs like meadowsweet or raspberry leaf. You'll also see a thick coating with mucosa problems when there's a lot of heat in the tongue, a lot of heat in the body. And it's like the mucosa is trying to catch up, create more and more because it's disappearing quickly. And this is like an acute phase. This would not be chronic. This would be acute. And this would be a situation where there might be an active parasite, or maybe there's been some kind of introduction into the body of some kind of pathogen, and you'll have this thick yellow coat, um, and you can see the heat, and you can see how the heat is drying up the coat, and the body's trying to compensate by creating more mucus, but it's also has an infection. So you have to use some, uh, I have my favorite plant. I think it might be the next one. No, I have favorite plants for this, and I will get to that in the, as we go along. Okay, so let's look at the mucosa again and get our sort of orientated. What are we talking about here? So this is the stomach. The stomach, of course, is a hollow organ that is open to the outside world. It's a bit in the center of your body. So, whatever comes into your mouth through the outside world has to travel a bit to get to the stomach, but it's still open. And it's a very high acidic environment, right? We all know that. And that acid will burn these cells here. This is your epithelial cells. And these are the cells that are out to the layer of the stomach. Here's all your little goblet cells releasing mucus into to cover these guys and have a protective barrier between the acid and these underlying tissues. And this is the mucosal barrier. There's a capillary here. Here's some interstitial fluid. We're going to talk about interstitial fluid, whole video on interstitial fluid. I got to pay attention to interstitial fluid as a herbalist. It's a big thing. And herbs work so beautifully in that part of the body, the fluid where our cells are floating. But there should also be some lymph action going on here. I just want to point out the epithelial tight junctions, and these are the little sort of hooks, I guess, sort of an iron hook like this between cells to protect from this area is to protect anything that might leak through the mucosa and come down into the interstitial fluid. Key, remember that. If these tight gap junctions get destroyed, you've got a problem. And so you've got like these different barriers here, okay? So good bacteria, bad bacteria, such an evaluation process about something we hardly know anything about. Yeah, that's what's living in this mucosa here. That's all bacteria, viruses, a lot of viruses in this area too. The viruses in the mucosa control the bacteria. There's all this like self-policing area. It's like it's a self-monitoring community kind of thing. Think about it that with all these different kind of characters that support the community and make sure that one part of the community doesn't try to take over. It's very good democracy in a mucosa membrane. It doesn't like one area doesn't overpower another. As long as it's healthy, there's a beautiful balance between viruses, phages, and bacteria, even the odd parasite. And it's self-regulating. It's a self-regulating community. So that's this is the mucosa. It's full of bacteria. It's the home of your microbiome, the mucosa. It's really important to have a healthy mucosa. So let's look at this. So these guys are called bacteriophages, and they live in our mucosa. And what they do is they hunt down bacteria that we don't want. So say we're in the colon here and there's E. coli, the bacteriophages will help track down those E. coli and kill them, blow them up. Boom, gone. Okay, and all of this is living here in the mucosa. Without the mucosa, these guys have nowhere to live. Key point. Without the mucosa, these guys have nowhere to live. And this is what happens with leaky gut syndrome. You have a mucosa, we can't even see it. It's gone. It's been worn away. Maybe someone was smoking, maybe they were taking a lot of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, maybe they just took a whole whack of antibiotics. Maybe they were taking, maybe they had a serious burn that created all, like, there's lots of reasons why the mucosa gets, maybe just chronic stress ate away at the mucosa. Too much heat in the body. Maybe, yeah, too much heat. Loss of the mucosa. So where does that bacteria go? It wants to eat. The mucosa is what's feeding it. It wants to eat. Well, it starts looking for food else places. And these little gap junctions, remember we talked about them, they get eaten first. And then all of a sudden you don't have that layer of the protective barrier. And stuff starts leaking down. And in some ways, this image is a bit troublesome because first it goes into the interstitial fluid and gets picked up by the lymphatic system. It doesn't necessarily go right into your bloodstream. If it did, you've got really big problems. It's more likely to move through your interstitial fluid, damaging cells, maybe breaking up the connective tissue within the interstitial fluid, getting picked up by the lymph, creating an immune response once it's picked up by the lymph, which is the inflammation, which is trying to kill the bacteria that's coming in, but it doesn't have this protective covering called the mucous membrane. So one of the first things you have to do when you suspect there's leaky gut is rebuild the mucous membrane. Inhalers are really bad for the mucous membrane. And I personally think the mucous membrane in the respiratory tract, the stomach, the esophagus, and the small intestine and large intestine. Anything that damages the mucosa is not a good idea. Okay, so that's leaky gut, and also the bacteria will make its way into the cells of the epithelial, start breaking them down. So you got a lot of problems. And this is, you remember, this layer, these epithelial tissues, they're the ones who are absorbing stuff, especially in the small intestine. They're the ones who are absorbing everything. These are the ones who are absorbing your nutrients. In the stomach, not so much. Those epithelial cells are more secretory. They're releasing stuff into the stomach to break down food, proteins, and minerals, mostly to prepare them for absorption. So yeah, the mucosa is really important. And I think you can do a lot of repair work with herbal medicine here. Don't go gasp, oh my God, I got a leaky gut and I'm never going to get better. I think the body is a powerful healer. And given the right resources, a lot of good can come to it. So one of my favorite plants of all times for like a leaky gut kind of situation, or where I suspect, and this could be someone who's, the mucous membrane in the stomach or the urinary tract or even the respiratory tract is damaged. I love plantain. I just love plantain. It grows everywhere. It's easy to get. And it is both a demulcent and an astringent. So you're going to get, for example, here, you're going to start building up the mucosa with the demulcent action, but you're also going to have that astringent action, which encourages the tissues to release the moisture, the mucus to the surface of the epithelial cells. But you're also going to start binding up some of this. And tannins also have the ability to bind bacteria, protein, the protein heads on bacteria binds them and slows down their motion. Super important. We're going to talk about that more. Tannins I consider microbiome balancing herbs that have tannins, astringents. as do demulcent herbs. They also help balance the microbiome because once you have rebuilt the mucosa, there's somewhere for the bacteria to live, and all this stuff, they'll go back home. Right now, these bacteria, you could kind of think of them like refugees. They've been like they've lost their home, and you rebuild their home, and they'll just go back home because they prefer to live in a mucosa. That's where they're supposed to be. Yeah, so just to review, tannins are in astringent herbs, polysaccharides are in demulcent herbs, tannins are considered drying, polysaccharides are moistening, and so this is a play of the water element here. And both tannins and polysaccharides are soluble in water, so teas are great. If I can use water as a solvent, I will always choose water. Yeah, sometimes you'll see like tinctures of corn silk or tinctures of, I've even seen marshmallow root tinctures. And really, it's a waste of alcohol, unless, of course, you just want to do a preservative of 25% or so alcohol in your tincture. But even then, just a quick tea really will work. The one demulcent herb that's kind of like question whether tincture, tea, and I think a tea works really well, is with Solomon seal. Those roots are very demulcent as well, and they're more for. I use them for dryness in the digestive tract, but I also use them mostly when there's dryness of ligaments and tendons. When the ligaments and tendons have lost their stretch and are tense and hard. So it's not unusual for me in a tea to formulate both a demulcent herb and an astringent herb in a single tea and use the two together to create a very whole medicine effect for the mucosa. So be careful of thinking, oh, with dryness, I only use demulcents, and with wet, I only use tannins. I often combine them because a demulcent will also soften hard mucus, which would be what you would see there. Okay, just to review, where is this mucous membrane? Where does this mucosa live? So all through, this is called the alimentary tract. So when we talk about the digestive tract, often we're talking about the liver and the pancreas, gallbladder. Here, we're just talking about the lumen. And so think of the human body like a donut, and not one of those donuts filled with jelly. If you're a donut filled with jelly, you've got a big problem. You need some really nice astringents and probably some biome balancing herbs that we're going to get to. Most of us, though, are more like a donut, and there is a hole, a tube all the way through. And this tube, including your mouth, is covered in a mucosa. And there's different thickness. The stomach has a very thick mucosa. The small intestine has a much thinner mucosa because the nutrients need to pass through the mucosa into the small intestine. So it's a thinner mucosa. It's much more fragile, the mucosa in the small intestine, than this mucosa in the stomach, because the mucosa in the stomach is protecting from an acidic environment. The respiratory tract. So this includes your sinuses, your nose. There is sinus all up above your eyebrows as well, down your pharynx, your bronchi, your trachea, your bronchioli. Okay, this is all lined with your mucosa, and a lot of what the mucosa in your nose and your sinuses, well, it's trapping stuff that you're breathing in. So that could include viruses, but also dust particles. It's really important. I've been doing a deep dive into Victorian England these days, particularly London. And, I am amazed at the dust, the black coal soot. And, they say that when someone blew their nose if you lived in London during Victorian England, the mucus in the handkerchief was black because of the black coal dust, the soot. And the job of the mucosa is to trap that dust from getting down into your lungs. You'll see that like with things, if you're working a lot with farmers, there's a thing called farmers' lungs where they have breathed in a lot of like uh, dust from hay and straw, animal feed, but also particles from chicken manure is a big one. And that is all supposed to be absorbed in here, and then the runny nose. So drying up your mucosa in your sinuses is not a great idea if you want long-term health. Urinary tract, not so much the kidneys. Again, the actual organs themselves, like the lungs, they don't have a mucosa. The kidneys don't have a mucosa, but the bladder, the hollow organs, and then these ureters and the urethra, they all have a mucosa. And again, there's different thicknesses depending on what's going on in the body. The vagina, the cervix, and the uterus all have a mucosa. It's interesting, this idea of the uterus having a mucosa, a mucous membrane, but yeah, it's open to the outside world. And the uterus also has its own microbiome. And I remember when I was in school 20 years ago, we were told that the uterus is a sterile environment, that it does not have bacteria in it. It doesn't have a mucous membrane where bacteria live. Wrong, wrong, wrong. And sometimes I wonder if some of the conditions we're seeing, like endometriosis and fibroids, are a disturbed mucosa and a disturbed microbiome in the uterus that leads to those conditions. I wonder that. So, anyways, and again, we think about like raspberry leaf, its action, well, it's an astringent. Is it an astringent for the mucosa, bringing a fresh mucosa into the uterus? I just wonder. A lot of uh, there is so much we do not know about the body and its relationship to plants. There is so much, no matter how clever we can talk about it, there is just so much we don't know. And the beautiful thing that I have learned being a herbalist is I don't know, I don't have to know everything. I don't have to know how a plant works specifically in this way and that way because it works. And all I have to know is that, yes, this plant seems to do this really well in this type of body. And that's all you really need to know, because there is no way to understand the dynamic, complex relationship between plants and the body. But you can make very, very educated guesses. Okay, so let's go back to our slideshow. Now, where is my share screen? Okay. Yeah, and one more thing. The mucosa in the vagina is a really interesting mucosa. And you really need to take care of the microbiome in the vagina and be careful what gets put into the vagina. Let's just put it that way. Yeah, women used to use Lysol in the vagina. They used to die from it. That was last century, not that long ago. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so we've talked about the mucosa is home of the microbes. So here is a stain of microbes. It kind of reminds me of this really ugly bridesmaid dress someone made me wear once, and it was lucky I loved that woman. Otherwise, I would have like not put on the dress, but it was like teal and peach. So anyways, every time I look at it, I'm like, yeah, that was a bad dress, but a fun party. Okay, so a lot of like you'll hear people say candida. Oh, I got terrible candida. But candida is a commensal fungi that's supposed to be living in the mucosa of the vagina and the gut. And what this Candida does, particularly in the vagina. It regulates the pH of the lumen. And a lot of the microbes that live in our body, they regulate the pH of the lumen. So if there is no Candida, you've got a problem because the vagina is a very acidic environment because it's very open to a lot of different kinds of microbes that it just does not want there. So Candida is a really important yeast in the body. Now, it can be an overgrowth. I'm not saying it's not an overgrowth, but we got there's a there's relationship. We have to think more in relationship as opposed to good guys and bad guys. We can think of bad bridesmaids dresses, but we have to think of uh, uh, microbes as needing to be rebalanced more so than gotten rid of. H. pylori is a really interesting microbe, and I wrote a little paper on H. pylori. You'll find it on my website, Abrah Herbs, and we definitely, I think, really have to rethink how we think about H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori. It is a commensal bacteria in the stomach. Again, it generally lives near the opening into the small intestine. And one of these things this bacteria does is it neutralizes stomach acids before it's shot, before they're squirted along with the food we've just eaten into the small intestine. And the small intestine is a very alkaline environment. From the pancreas, bicarbonate is secreted into the small intestine to keep it an alkaline environment. So the food's going from a very acidic to a very alkaline environment. And as it passes through this area of the body, one of the roles of H. pylori is to create an alkaline environment, to alkalize that chyme. That's what it's called, chyme, that liquid. Yeah, and it's lived in the human gut forever. Like you can trace H. pylori back to little tiny villages where your ancestors came from. We pick it up at the kitchen table. It's often shared with families. And yeah, when H. pylori becomes a problem is when the mucosa of the stomach is disturbed. And basically, remember way back here when we were looking at the leaky gut. So let's pretend this is the stomach, and the H. pylori starts eating, coming into these cells and creating terrible inflammation. But it's because it's lost its home. So this is why we herbalists will use plants like marshmallow and licorice. Licorice is a beautiful demulcent to help start repairing the mucosa of the stomach. Here's another really interesting bacteria, the Bacteroides fragilis. Now, my Latin is not the best, so I apologize if I've pronounced that wrong. These guys, they live in the colon, and oh, I could go on and on about these guys. I just think these guys are the most fascinating bacteria. And these guys actually train our immune system on how to recognize bacteria that's helpful and bacteria that's not so helpful. Like, so it will teach, like, you got to take care of this E. coli that's coming into that's present right now. It has this like very intimate relationship with our immune system. It trains it. And breastfed babies, that's one of the things that's happening. Is something like crazy amount of breast milk. Like in the first few months is like 60% of breast milk is just to feed the microbiome and build it up, because it's the microbiome that's training the immune cells to recognize self and other. The other thing that's really interesting about these particular bacteria is that bile is our body's natural biome balancer. And it will, as it moves through the digestive tract, through the small intestine and the colon, it will destroy overgrowth of different types of bacteria. This particular bacteria, the bacteroids, are not disturbed by the bile. This bacteria lives in the mucous membrane. So if the mucous membrane is not present, this bacteria too will burrow into the epithelial tissue and make its way into the interstitial tissue. And once it's into the interstitial fluid, it becomes a pathogen. And if you like read a few little articles on this, you'll see it classed as a pathogen, but it's only a pathogen when it's in the wrong place in the body. So without a good mucosa, this really helpful bacteria can't do its work for us, can't support life. It becomes something else. So herbs with berberine are great for helping to balance the microbiome in the mucous membrane. These herbs generally are drying, generally. Golden seal is like, the king of the berberine herbs, or the queen, or, you know, uh, however we want it, the great, let's just call it the great herb for the mucous membrane. And the eclectics, practitioners of herbal medicine at the turn of the last century, they called it a mucous membrane tonic. They didn't consider it so much a microbiome balancer. And this plant actually does not, the berberine actually does not touch these guys. Just like the it doesn't have any action on this. It has more action on more pathogenic bacteria that shouldn't be where it is. So these are just a few of my favorites: Oregon grape, golden seal, barberry, uh, California poppy, and celandine. These two come from the poppy family. They both have berberine in it. I use a lot of celandine. I really like celandine as a berberine rich herb. Um, yeah. And all these plants I grow in my garden. Golden seal is a little tricky to grow. You got to kind of like really baby it. But all these plants I grow, so you can have access to this medicine. But these plants accompanying some astringents and a nice demulcent will really support the health of the mucous membrane throughout the body. So urinary tract, vagina, alimentary tract, respiratory tract. You have other herbs that are amazing biome balancers that will support the health of the mucosa. So Elecampane, Inula helenium, love this plant. It's the roots of this plant. It's bitter pungent. I'm about to make a video on bitter pungents, so watch for it. They're really important herbs. There's a number of them, and they can be differentiated. And again, remember, because they are bitter herbs, they encourage the liver to release bile, which supports the health of the mucosa and its relationship with the microbiome. Sage is a beautiful herb. I use sage both as teas and I do fresh plant tinctures. It's a herb that's high in tannins, so it has that drying effect, but it also has some bitter principles, and it's a powerful biobalancer. I really like this herb a lot. And it's so easy to grow. You get a few nice sage plants, and at the end of the summer, you have so much medicine. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to get a little more reductionist, and it's a little more complicated, but I'm pretty sure you can handle it. So in our mucosa, I'm going to shift to my notes even. In our mucosa, there are these guys, immunoglobulin A's, IgA. And these guys, what they do is they live in the mucosa throughout our bodies. So they're in our sinuses, they're in our respiratory tract, they're in the vagina, they're in throughout your gut, And these guys are amazing. These are part of our immune system. So oh yeah, And they're also in saliva, and they're in tears, and they're in colostrum. So when a baby is first born, a newborn, and they receive breast milk, the breast milk is full of these IgA antibodies. And I just remember my youngest brother. He always had this, like, I shouldn't talk about him like this because he's an older guy now, super responsible, but he always had like a runny nose. And that was his body releasing things, releasing something that was irritating his body. That was his immune response. And lately I've been allergic to my cat, and I've been watching my eyes tear up a lot, and tears coming out. I'm thinking, oh yeah, that's my IgA antibodies, like clearing out an irritant out of my eyes so it doesn't go into my body. Okay, so the IgA antibodies are not present in the mucosa of a newborn until commensal bacteria is introduced. So the commensal bacteria is introduced through the colostrum, and also, the first thing a woman does after giving birth, she's all sweaty and a mess, is she takes that baby and puts it on her breast, which is right next to her armpit, and it's like that child is then just like swarmed with her bacteria, and plus the colostrum is providing bacteria, and they're suggesting that it is the gut bacteria that's living in the mucosa, because remember, this here is the mucosa. It triggers the release of IgA antibodies. So there's this relationship. Everything happens in the body in relationship. And the problem is, if you disturb one part of the relationship, it has all these domino effects. So when you're working, you'd say, okay, the mucosa, it seems really dry and I need to support it. And you give someone a demulcent, then you're starting to rebuild that relationship with the microbiome in the body, which means you're protecting those underlying tissues, you're facilitating all the activity that the microbiome is going to do. Okay. Sometimes these are called like prebiotics, but I find that term a little tricky. Okay. So this is an important piece of information also about the health of the mucosa. So IgA recognition of beneficial bacteria is decreased in acutely undernourished children, but the factors driving these changes in IgA targeting are unknown. So basically what it's saying is, like, when there's undernourishment, the mucosa is damaged. And so are these, there's nowhere for these guys to live. Like, these guys are all living in the lumen. They're here in this nutrient-rich diet. The IgA antibodies are able to interact in the mucosa. They're not like traveling around out here. I suspect it's protein balance. That's what I suspect it is. And I find that people who have not adequate protein in their diet, they tend to get a lot sicker, a lot more. And it and I part of me wonders if it's because of the condition of the mucosa and the ability of it to act as a barrier as well as a home it's a barrier for bacteria as well as a home for bacteria. Okay, so what do these guys do? So there's this kind of strange language physiologists use, and they call it mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. And I'm not sure, because this is all happening in the mucous membrane, not in the lymphatic system. Maybe they're thinking the mucous membrane is part of the lymphatic system. I don't know. Maybe it's just old language that needs updating. But I just think of the lymphatic system and the mucosa. There's clearly a relationship, especially if the mucosa is damaged and bacteria is seeping into the epithelial tissues. The first system that's going to interact with that will be the lymphatic system. So maybe they're thinking that way. I don't know. I haven't given it that much thought, quite honestly. But what these IgA antibodies do is our gut releases 3 grams of them every day, which is extraordinary considering that these guys, I checked out to see how much they weigh, and it's almost like they don't weigh anything. And our gut is releasing 3 grams of them every day into the mucosa. That's where they're living. And what they do is they clump the pathogenic bacteria and viruses together to stop their movement. So bacteria and viruses move around. They're not stagnant. They like to move, and they will move through tissues. They do all sorts of things. They move. They're little ever ready bunny kind of things, always moving around. So once they're clumped together and they can't move, they die faster. And they get clumped into the mucosa. And remember, the mucosa is constantly moving. You could think of like the mucosa as like the waves coming ashore all the time. The ocean is constantly moving. Once in a while, it's really still, but mostly it's just constantly moving with these currents. And that's how the mucosa is. And the mucosa is moving towards holes that lead to the outside world. So the sinus, that mucosa is moving towards our nose, our colon is moving towards the anus. Our respiratory tract, it's coming up, cough it out, right? Out it goes, or sneeze, it's moving up and out. So clump this bacteria or viruses together and then have a good sneeze. Out it goes. Clump these out, cough, out goes the mucus with all the bugs. That's how it works. Or you go pee and there's mucus in the urine, and that's a classic sign of a urinary tract infection, and that's the carrying out of the bugs. So you don't want to dry it up. What else? Oh yeah, so a few of the bacteria that they're really good at finding. And it's interesting, historically, these are bacteria that has caused a lot of problems for human beings, and that this defense mechanism has come in. But these live in the mucosa. Without the mucosa, these don't have the same kind of power. And the other thing about these IgA antibodies is they coat the common cell bacteria, protecting them. They can recognize what bacteria needs to be clumped together and destroyed or carried out of the body, and at the same time protecting the common cell bacteria that helps us. So there's this like really interesting relationship going on. So in my mind, I go, okay, so what herbs are so I start thinking, I wonder what herbs turn on these IgA antibodies. So I go for a little hunt, and I'm thinking maybe astragalus, because I love astragalus for helping to moderate the immune system, strengthen it, moderate it. Thinking maybe mushrooms, maybe. Anyways, I couldn't find anything that was really clear. There was some weird research on chickens that were kept in barns, overcrowded barns of chickens, and I'm like, oh God, why do we treat animals this way? But then I found this formula from Japanese herbal medicine that has been shown to enhance IgA secretions from the mucosa. And I love finding these old formulas and then thinking about them. Well, what's going on here? Why have they formulated these herbs in this way and used them for thousands of years? This is very old herbal medicine, very venerable herbal medicine. Why did they do it this way? So it's a 10 herb formula from Japan. And the first plant is astragalus. Yeah, so astragalus, the great immune modulator. Astragalus is a complex plant. I often wonder if it's also a mucous membrane plant with those polysaccharides it contains. It's sweet. I often think it also helps repair mucous membranes. Korean ginseng is not a plant I have experience with. I'm kind of scared of the plant, actually. Uh, uh, I don't know how to use this plant well. I've never used it. a little intimidated by it. But it's a very stimulating adaptogen. That's what I know about it. Angelica root, super interesting because we're going to look at angelica root. And the angelica root is uh, a bitter pungent plant. It has a bitter pungent taste. So remember we talked about Elecampane earlier as balancing the microbiome with that release of the um, bile. And then the pungency is created by volatile oils in angelica. And angelica traditionally is thought of as a herb that's a mucolytic, and that's like thins mucus. So thick, gooey mucus. And remember how we talked about if the mucus is too thick, it weighs down on the tissues. And if that's in the low intestine, if that's in the small intestine, like the villi can't do the job. They can't get the absorption. The mucosa is too thick. And the same thing in the chest. If the mucosa is too thick, it weighs down on the cilia. So you want to thin it out. So these are called mucolytic herbs, the bitter pungent herbs. Blue Pearl, I don't have a lot of experience with. Again, I know it's a very powerful liver herb. I have heard that it's if someone's demonstrating a lot of anger. So Blue Perum's a great herb, which to me suggests that maybe it's a very cooling herb. It cools off heat. Licorice is a great demulcent, especially if it's used as a tea. You remember it's the polysaccharides we're after. So here we are offering this demulcent. Black cohosh. I love this plant. This is one of my favorite plants. Black cohosh. And black cohosh is like we think about it for rheumatism. It was traditionally used for aches. Aches in the hips, aches in the lower back. I use it a lot for neck, shoulder aches as well. Achy pain. And achy pain is considered pain of congestion. Things aren't moving, stuck energy. And remember when we talked first about water element is sticky. So when there's too much water, everything gets stuck. And black cohosh is great for unstucking stuff. So if someone says to you, I'm stuck, think, black cohosh. We got to get this thing moving, get everything moving. Ginger, a warming circulatory stimulant. Again, that movement, that bringing new in. Orange peel is a bitter, lots of flavonoids, and the jujube. That's this guy here. I don't know anything about this herb, but I could guess it's high in flavonoids, and flavonoids are always important to have in formulas. Anyways, it's always interesting to take apart old formulas, but this formula enhances IgA secretions. Which herb? Is it a combination of them? I don't know. It's just interesting. Okay, traditional views of the mucosa. So this guy, Samuel Thompson, was an American herbalist, late 1700s, early 1800s. He was an uneducated guy. And he was kind of like down with the system and kind of like, oh my God, these doctors just keep poisoning people and they keep dying, and he couldn't get good treatment for his family. So he was using herbs. Um, his training apparently was originally with a woman named Widow Benton. It always kind of nettles me that we just know her name is Widow Benton, and that's it. A lot of people suggest at this point that she was probably First Nations, and that he probably learned a lot of his medicine from First Nations. He used a lot of indigenous plants. And he also used indigenous healing ways. So here's someone who probably learned from people he didn't actually credit for the information. And what I think about that too is that, Samuel Thompson influences herbal medicine today. Many practitioners study his work, and it is worth this study. And so thank you, First Nations, for bringing this knowledge forward to us in this time. So he was all about, Samuel Thompson was all about raising body temperature and eliminating canker. So canker, I think I might, oh, I didn't. I took out the picture. Canker is essentially you know, in Ayurvedic, it's called amen. So it's like thick, congested fluid. And like I certainly understand it in terms of interstitial fluid when the interstitial fluid is really stuck and stagnant. And again, we will talk about interstitial fluid in another video. But I also think of canker as like stuck mucosa, thick, heavy, stuck mucosa. It's not moving. So I think of canker in both ways. So the first thing he always did was he always basically heated the body up. We have to think about the time Samuel Thompson was practicing in. There was a lot of, acute conditions. Fever was huge. He was living in an area that was high in malaria. There's a lot of malaria in the Eastern Seaboard. Where I live, people were just dropping dead of malaria. There's actually a plaque in the city near my home that states how many people died of malaria during one big construction project. Yeah, so the first thing he would do would be cleanse the stomach, so make people vomit. And that was the idea of like eliminating this canker from the stomach, this thick, gooey mucosa. Then he would like heat the body up. And then the last thing he did was he used more herbs to remove canker. And the three herbs that he used a lot were lobelia, cayenne, and bayberry. He was using lobelia. I use a lot of lobelia in my practice. I think it's an amazing herb. He was using higher doses of lobelia than I was. He was actually using it to make people vomit as a purgative. So vomit, get the poison out. And then he was using cayenne pepper, a lot of cayenne. Cayenne's such a tricky plant to use. We grew some really nice hot peppers in the garden last summer, and I have a whole whack of them in the kitchen. And I keep trying to use them. And every time I use them, I can't really eat the food. The other day, I came home with all this really beautiful kale. And I like made the garlic and oil and some salt and pepper and frying it up, sort of doing an Asian style food. I think, oh, I'm just going to chop up a little bit of this pepper and I sprinkle it on my kale. I couldn't eat it. It was just like my nose was running, my eyes were running, my mouth, there was water all through my mouth, and I was sweating. So you want to think about this fire element. This is like fire. Fire element moves the water element, thins it out. So if there's a lot of thick canker and you put heat like cayenne pepper, it's going to thin it out and move it out of the body. And remember, tears and the mucus in your nose and the saliva, they're all full of IgA antibodies. So like you're increasing the release of AGI antibodies throughout your mucosa when you take a plant like cayenne. It's trying to figure out how to use it in a good way. That's the challenge, and that not to overwhelm the people. And then bayberry is a crazy interesting plant in grows all over the place where I live, mostly near water. All the little lakes have little bits of bayberry about it. I am growing it in my garden. It's fairly dry and it's doing pretty good. Um, and this plant is a warming astringent. Most astringents are fairly neutral in temperature, but this is a warming astringent. So if you're looking at a really cold condition in the bowel, but you think you have the mucosa is thick and gooey and needs some support, and you want to add some heat, bayberry is a great plant to choose. Okay, another way in humoral medicine, people have talked about phlegmatics. It's one of the constitutions, a phlegmatic person. And these people have phlegm. These people are damp. These people are wet. These people have, they're kind of a mix of earth and water element. They're dominant elements. And that earth water element creates a very stable abundance, right? Think about earth and water in the garden, right? Stable abundance, but they don't necessarily have a lot of heat. There's not a lot of movement. You want to think about like air air element is the movement. It's all the thoughts, it's like being able to grab thoughts from anywhere and consolidate them. And then the fire element is the curiosity. Fire element is like what focuses the mind. So when you don't have a lot of air and fire, there might be a poor focus and allowing of new in. And that's one of the challenges with the phlegmatic is they like to do things in the same old way. So here's her phlegmatic humoral medicine, which is the traditional medicine of Europe, the phlegmatic, water and earth. So again, um, traditionally, seeds, pulses, and grains were seen as fire element. So giving these people lots of seeds and pulses and grains to bring some fire. And flowers are the air element. So you would give them plants that have lots of flowers, like calendula might be a nice plant. I kind of just go back to how I think about plants, and I think warming, astringents, and alternatives. If there's a lot of bogginess in the body, if there's a lot of wet in the body, if the body's wet, use your alternatives. Your alternatives work to help open up systems of elimination and move excess out. Alternatives are super interesting plants. And when I'm going to talk about inflammation, I think I'm talking about inflammation in February, and the term anti-inflammatory in herbal medicine, and alternatives are often considered anti-inflammatory herbs, but really they are alternatives, not necessarily anti-inflammatories. Chinese medicine, again, if there's a lot of moisture, which means there's going to be a lot of phlegm, a lot of mucosa. The mucosa is kind of bogged down. All these different conditions are associated with it. And if you really look at a lot of these challenges associated with this is it's an imbalance in the microbiome. Like bad breath is body odor, unpleasant smell. That's all like a microbiome imbalance. Lethargy, unable to concentrate, like that's like, oh, things aren't moving properly, though there's not enough fire and air in the there's not enough kind of like freedom of movement. um Vaginal itchiness, that's definitely a microbiome imbalance. Libido, snoring, coughing with or without mucus, again, that's the mucous membrane. Sticky poo, again, that's mucous membrane. So again, a lot of this has to do with the health of the mucous membrane. Too wet. So just a couple of demulcents I really love. I love violet flowers. I have this big patch of violet flowers in my garden and I just love it. And these plants are demulcents. The flower leaf, I usually use flower leaf. And I this is one demulcent I do like to use in a tincture, because by the time you dry all those violets, you hardly have anything. And, 2 teas later, all your violets are gone. So I often will tincture these up fresh. Um, and these are beautiful lymphatics as well. And remember, there's that relationship between, like, if the mucosa is damaged, the lymphatic system is going to be overworking. So this is sort of a really lovely plant in that it supports the health of the lymphatic system, the activity of the lymphatic system, while also supporting the health of the mucosa. It has an affinity for the neck, upper chest, and breasts. Violet, also high in salicin, which is again back to salicylic acid in meadowsweet and willow. So it has some pain relieving properties. Violet's a really nice demulcent. It's ruled by Venus, so it's cool and sweet. Slippery elm is like the ultimate diet demulcent. I use quite a bit of slippery elm in my practice, very guiltily. It is an endangered plant. I do know people who use different kinds of elm trees, and there is this slippery, gooey substance between the outer bark and the inner cortex of the plant, just as it's shown here. This is where the medicine is. And if you get where I used to live, someone had cut down an elm tree, and I just went and grabbed the branches and peeled back the bark, and it was all this gooey substance. So you just peel it back and then peel this off and dry it, and that's your medicine. Um, I find slippery elm particularly useful in cases of colitis. So in colitis, often there's a lot of diarrhea, and I find the slippery elm will slow down the diarrhea with its absorption properties, while also helping to rebuild the mucosa and support the health of the microbiome. I also use slippery elm when people are coming off protein pump inhibitors, so those are antacids. I I have used, I've seen a lot of people who need to come off those protein pump inhibitors, and they're hard drugs to come off of, and the slippery elm really, really can help in a dramatic way. And those are the two places where I use the slippery elm the most. It's a very high mineral plant. Again, demulcent, if you let it sit too long, it gets really, really slimy, and compliance totally falls apart. So I tend to, in worst case scenarios, I'll just have someone take capsules of slippery elm and drink lots of water with them. Or I might just have it in a tea and have an overnight steep on the counter with other herbs. And that's usually okay. When I do have people on slippery elm, I do ask them to take a lot more water, increase their water intake. Yarrow. Yarrow isn't necessarily seen as a plant for healing the mucosa. It's not a demulcent. It does have some astringents in it. And again, when I've worked with people with colitis, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, or just straight up colitis, um, I find yarrow a really important herb to heal the underlying epithelial tissue when the mucosa has been damaged. So I'm going to say that again. So if the mucosa is damaged, the tissue directly underneath the mucosa is called the epithelial tissue. And when it's damaged, those are cells that are like go into the interior of your body. And when those cells are damaged, all sorts of different types of problems occur. And yarrow, I find, is really useful for healing the epithelial tissue. I might use yarrow and slippery elm together. Like I always work in formulation. Um, I would definitely be using this with some kind of demulcent, but I love this plant. And also for the urinary tract, that's other place. If there's a lot of urinary tract, chronic urinary tract infections or interstitial cystitis, a lot of irritation to the underlying tissues of the mucosa, I use yarrow. A great healing herb. Sage, here we are again. Obviously, I was sort of on a sage kick when I was making this PowerPoint. Yeah, sage, great plant. Really high in volatile oils. Volatile oils are fascinating. Um, Again, I talking about volatile oils specifically in a video called "The Nuance of Herbs." Pungent bitters. So if you want to know more about them, check that video out. And Angelica, and we already talked about Angelica being a mucolytic in that it softens hard mucus. So, and I think that's it. Oh, no, I put in a formula. So one of the conditions that you want to support the mucosa is with asthma. That's often a mucosa imbalance. And, too much mucus, not enough mucus, overproduction of mucus, underproduction of mucus. So I see a lot. And the challenge with inhalers is they dry out the mucosa. They're cortisone, basically, or adrenaline. Adrenaline's really bad for the mucosa. So here's a little formula I use for breathing while I'm rebuilding mucosas. So this would be if someone was feeling breathless, this is would be the type of formula I would give them. Some lobelia, which relaxes the bronchi, thyme, which also relaxes the bronchi. I might use hyssops too. I use hyssops in place of thyme a lot to help relax the bronchi, but also mildly irritating. Those volatile oils are mildly irritating, so they increase like removal of unwanted substances from the respiratory tract. Angelica again thins hard mucus, thins it out. And then lastly, California poppy just to relax the mind because not being able to breathe is pretty scary. So relax the mind. Yeah. And then in the background, there would be a whole protocol for repairing the mucosa. So I hope you found this video helpful and that when you're talking to people about herbal medicine, you consider the health of their mucosa. Often people will just say, I feel really wet, or I feel dry inside, or they might say, I feel really stuck. That's a sign that the mucosa needs support. Um, you can tell by what kind of cough they have, dry coughs or wet coughs. You can ask for presence of mucus in the stool or in urine. Yeah, or that they always have a chronically stuffed nose. This all tells you about the health of the mucosa. And the plants know how to take care of it. And just trust your plants and they'll do the work for you. And what else do I want to say? Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this video. I will be checking comments on um, the website. So if you have questions or comments, please leave one. And check out the other videos. I'm going to be uploading them some every month. So for a little while. And yeah, I hope you have a good day. Okay, bye.